Good morning in the West Coast, good afternoon in the East Coast, and good evening in Europe. If you're in Asia, you're working very late tonight. My name is Modesto Casas, and I'm here to speak to you a bit about practical selling. These are ways to get more sales, fewer surprises, with a lot less overhead, and that's typically what we look for in the sales world. Again, my name is Modesto Casas. I'm the founder and president of InRegion Inc., a consulting company that takes companies internationally. I'm also the creator of practical solution selling, and I've been using these techniques that I'm going to share with you for the last 3 decades, more or less. I've had executive worldwide management positions with several entrepreneurial companies, so I've always been involved with the entrepreneurial world in helping these companies to beat their larger competitors. I've also been able to use these techniques to form relationships across various countries, Brazil, China, Europe, Eastern Europe, India, etc. So it does transcend the cultural nuances of each area. I'm specifically referring today to the business-to-business sale because it's quite complex. It involves multiple constituencies. It could take weeks, months. I've seen B2B sales, multi-million-dollar sales take years to complete. It involves the progression of very costly events, and not just in time, but also in investment in money. And at the end, it leads to a close, or for most people who compete, to a loss, which is a very expensive loss. The B2B sale requires the salesperson to understand multiple needs within the customer. It requires that they drive the business at different levels of the organization with very, very different audiences. And above all, to avoid forecasting surprises. That is extremely important because it's very costly to be surprised late in the process. So what I found that works and has worked for me for a very long time very well is to keep it very practical. But what does practical mean? It means that it's relating to what is real rather than what is possible or imagined. So there is no theories in anything we're going to discuss today. It is likely to succeed and reasonable to do or to use, and definitely that's part of the practicality of the system, and it's appropriate or suited for the actual use. So today we're focusing on B2B. There are permutations of this for the consumer sale. It's something that you can use with an existing system that you have today. Most people subscribe to some system. Or you can make it your entire system and be even more practical. It is also something that I have seen increase sales in every single case that I have used it, and certainly has reduced overhead, which is one of the things that I hate most, is paperwork. And most people in the audience at this point can probably agree with me in that case. I'm going to say, please forgive me. It looks like there's a bit of a lag on the slides. So let's talk about practical selling. Let's get into the meat of it and what it is. Practical selling really has to do with simplifying what we do in order to be successful and to do it with the least overhead possible. There are really 4 centers of influence in every B2B sale, just 4. There are 4 elements to every sale, and there are 4 stages. What we'll do in the next 40 minutes or so is we're going to go through each one of these in a way that you will be able to utilize them, to use them today after you hang up the phone. Okay. First, let's look at the B2B sale in general. Typically, you're working across time, weeks, months, whatever, and you're traversing levels of influence in an organization, from a synchronization of objectives to agreeing to engage, to proving a solution, floating some business model, setting trap for your competition, which I hope you do, and refining business models, and eventually you get to the other end where you can close. So you go from qualification to a close. And it really is not a straight line, as you will see in most theoretical systems, selling systems. It is not a straight line. It actually moves up and down in the organization. And when done right, it looks just like this. It starts high, goes towards the functional part of the business, and then moves back up to the highest influence to close the sale. This type of sales situation carries 4 different elements, and there are blocks to the sale. So you can be blocked in each one of those areas, and I call this the sales smile. It looks like a smile if we do it right. If we do it wrong, it turns upside down and it looks like a frown. And that's exactly what we feel like when we don't do this correctly. So let's start first. As you're traversing this organization, let's start with the centers of influence. There's only 4. There are the deciders who write the checks and establish what people are actually going to do at the high level. There are evaluators who decide if they're going to propose or recommend your solution, typically people who are also going to use it. There are influencers who simply influence without being completely directly involved. And there are guides who help you through the sale. And some of them could be inside the organization, some of them are outside. So when we look through each one of these, what I'm going to try to do, this is a 2-day training course that I do for my clients. I am going to attempt to do this in another 30 minutes or so. Okay, so bear with me. The slides and the presentation will be available after for you to look at. The decider typically has a very broad view, deals in the area of corporate objectives, and it's a person that gives you very limited access. We just can't reach out very easily. There could be hiding behind voicemail or administrators. They delegate things, so other people are doing it for them. They typically carry an executive title, but depends on your company. It is always definitely the person who can approve that sale to move into purchasing. And you'll find that other people defer to the decider. The deciders actually live at the edges of that smile, at the beginning and at the end of your sales organization. And hopefully you're touching with them also through the sale. But they're very difficult to reach, but very important to reach. And we'll go into actual details on how we deal with them. The evaluators, on the other side, are very inward-looking. They have a job to do. Maybe the decider has told them to go find a solution. Maybe they're taking their own initiative. But they're typically the folks in a B2B sale who are very interested in features. These are the folks that have lists. These are the folks that are actually running the project on how they're going to verify what they can use. And they're actually down in the functionality level of the smile, or the bottom of the smile, where they are doing all these projects. We tend to spend a lot of time with these folks because this is where a lot of the very, very heavy functional selling is taking place. Anywhere in that environment, you have the influencers. They can appear anywhere. And I'm certain you have seen them. I have seen them. I have made the mistake of ignoring them at some point and then realizing how dangerous that is to do, because they have access to the decider typically. Other people mention them, but they have nothing to do with the project at hand. That should be definitely a red flag to say, I should talk to that person. They pop up in meetings. I've had people from completely different divisions pop up in a meeting, and I couldn't figure out why. They have special projects. Sometimes they have business cards that say staff, and they speak the same words as the decider. They typically have access to the decider, and the decider is going to look to them to help them with a decision. So do not ignore these guys, the influencers. And then finally are the guides. Some systems call them coaches. Some other systems call them friends. The fact is that there are people who can be nurtured and who win with you. And ever since the moment you begin doing a sales campaign, we should start looking for these guides. They win with you. You know you are nurturing them when they begin to share information. They make introductions. They give you advice. They're clearly looking for relationship and to help you. It is very helpful because they could appear anywhere. It is very helpful to try to determine as early on as possible how the guide wins and why they're interested. It could be many, many reasons, personal or business. Ideal situation, I'm sure most of us have had it. The decider becomes your guide. Then it's a real smile. So find these folks, no matter what they are, even if they're outside the company, and nurture them because they will help, and you'll see how we use these guides. So there are some do's and don'ts that I've gathered. Again, I've just picked some of the most significant items for each of these. When dealing with deciders, do meet them early. Most common mistake is not to meet the decider, but to spend a lot of time with the evaluators, and then either let the evaluator take you to the deciders or go to them later. Crucial mistake, because you may have someone like me on the other end who went to the decider day one and is already forming a relationship based on value and based on objectives that we both share. So meet the deciders early, talk to them about corporate value, and build bridges so you can come back during your sales campaign. And we'll go into much more detail for that. That's quite an important thing. Do not wait to be introduced. Very common mistake. Don't talk features. I don't know, I'm sure. I wish I could see you raise your hands. How many have been in a presentation where someone insisted on presenting features to the decider and have the decider cut the meeting short or has to leave or gets an urgent call and they leave? See them once. Do not see them once. Do not see them late in the process. Very, very important. The evaluators, on the other hand, I tend to match immediately with my product expert. I have a marketing person or a technical person who is an expert, because these folks just want to know everything about the product because they're going to put their necks on the line recommending the product. So they use a checklist. I use a checklist. I synchronize timelines. These are project folks. They have something to do. I try to adjust my actions to fit what we're both trying to do. The one thing to watch out with evaluators is not to get pigeonholed. What I mean by that is if you ever see a pigeon coop, you have a pigeon in a hole, there's a pigeon next to it, and one pigeon cannot see the other pigeon, and they don't care. Many evaluators can be like that because they have an individual job to perform. So be careful when the evaluator says, you just talk to me, I'm the only guy you need to talk to, and this sale will be done. Red flag. Don't be fuzzy with goals, and don't start proposing business and pricing. Most evaluators that I know and that I have worked with throughout the years hate anything related to sales. So presenting them with pricing and so on, it's okay to answer, but it's presentations, it's probably not the best thing. The influencers, you have to find and meet, as I said very early, and find out why they're interested. What is it how are they affected? And you can do this typically over a cup of coffee or in a short telephone call. And I tend to reach out to influencers in every key times during the sales process because they tend to be a bridge to the decider without me having to go to the decider every 2 days with something. Don't ignore, I have done it, not a good thing. So that's how I learned. Don't wait till the end to meet them. In fact, if you see somebody who pops up, like I described earlier, go find out why they're there. And do not reveal any information about them. I have found that many influencers are very political people, so they don't want other people to know. Sometimes they're up-and-comers. They're working on their next promotion, and they are definitely involved with the influences of the company. And then finally, the guides. I like to keep them informed. I show appreciation every chance I have, and I share some of my own inside information with them to establish a relationship based on trust on both sides. I don't reveal them as a source. I never tell anyone, "Hey, Joe is my guide." That's a big no-no. I do not create difficulties for coaches, and I'm very careful never to ask for too much, not to compromise them in any way. Make sure that I protect that relationship, which is very valuable. So knowing now the four centers of influence and a little bit about how to identify them and deal with them, let's talk a little bit about the elements of the sale. Because again, there's four elements. There's the business objectives, functional needs, a functional fit, and a business fit. And if you want to keep it practical, that's all that really matters in that sales. Once again, we're working the smile. So let's go through the smile and address these four elements. Qualifying the business objectives is typically going to happen with a decider. Remember, the decider lives up there at the edges of the smile. And here, we need to now prepare, as you will see in every single case, we need to prepare to meet a decider and to align our business objectives. This is very important to do very early. Ideally, it's the first or the second call, because you usually are called by an evaluator, not by a decider. So very early on, one has to prepare before meeting with these folks or even for a phone call, studying the prospect, speaking to other people that you may know in the organization, including the evaluator, trying to learn more about the problems the organization is facing. And then I like to create in my own mind a value proposition that I carry with me for this customer. I'm not presenting it. I'm not sharing it. At this point, I'm just keeping it to myself. Then when I'm in front of the decider, I ask questions that are more related to their business. How do you address this problem now? Are you using other products, other methods? Why haven't you done this before? And you can do this in a dialogue. It's not a Q&A, but it's just a dialogue, understanding what's important to them. I'd like to always ask, what do you expect is going to be the biggest challenge in this? You'll find that deciders have already thought this through, because that's how they got to be at the level they're in. They're looking for the potential problems. And then one of the things that I've noticed in traveling with so many salespeople who reported to me and with my clients is they tend to go in front of the decider and say, well, do you own the budget? That's not really so much of that's a close-end question, which I don't like in any case, but it could be very direct, especially if you're meeting the person the first time. So I tend to hide that question in different ways. Sometimes I say things like, what happens if you don't get an approval to make this change? And wait for the answer. Sometimes the answer is, what do you mean? I am the one who approves it. What happens if you don't get the budget approved? What happens if you're not able to change? And I interlace these questions into our discussion, but at the end, I'm walking away with an agreement and an understanding of what are their business objectives. And I typically share those with the decider before I walk away. And then I can check off my first block that says my alignment is, my objectives are aligned. Then the next stop, and sometimes the first stop, is with the evaluators down below, when I'm trying to determine if we have the ability to compete. So it's a qualification of functionality. And at that point, there is a preparation. I like to introduce my product expert, if there is one, and I recommend highly that you do the same, because you create a parallel, it's like building two bridges. If one breaks down because you sold too much, the other one is still open. And product experts can be a tremendous benefit. I tend to research similar customers, so I have an idea of what problems the evaluator is trying to solve, because other customers have solved it. It also helps if you mention, I have another customer who is solving the problem this way. Will that work for you? That type of thing. If it's not confidential information. And then I recommend that you go to the functionality qualification discussion, prepared to listen, not to present. You may have a presentation, they may ask for a presentation, but always listening first, asking what is important to them, and if you have to present, then making an overview presentation, focusing on the things that are most important to them. Because that time you're going to spend with the evaluators is key, that you understand how they're getting their work done today, because that is the pain that they're trying to solve, and get an idea of how they think they can improve it, and then discuss what kind of features, because now we're dealing in the world of features, what kind of features are absolutely necessary? Have you thought about this? I'm sure some of you might be surprised how many times they have no idea. They're looking for your directive. If they start saying they want features and we don't understand why, we can ask why and keep asking why, because that will reveal a lot of other information below the basic feature and perhaps other pain points that they have. You have succeeded, and you can check off that flag if you walk away with an agreed to critical to success criteria. And you get extra credits if you walk out of there with that list in a prioritized fashion, because that list becomes extremely important for the next step. The next step is when you have to do a pilot program or an evaluation or a test, so you can prove that your functionality will work for them. So that list becomes extremely, extremely important. So the first step in preparing for the third block of any sale is the critical to success list, having a clear list that has been agreed to. And you can't always get it, but you can always get enough and at least keep good notes and share with the evaluator. Then, in part of preparing as well, is breaking the project down into milestones. Again, some of these pilot programs or evaluations could last weeks or months. So it's good to break them down because you have a reason to test how you are doing. And there's something very important about this, about these milestones that we'll discuss in a few minutes. And always discuss the evaluation or the pilot program or the testing with your product expert. So you're getting a picture that the product expert is very important. That is exactly right. Now, executing this, well, keeping the checklist items covered. So you keep a checklist to make sure that the critical to success list is being covered. And every time one is covered, I check it off. And I will tell the evaluator, today we checked off this and this and this. Hopefully your product expert is saying that to them as well, if you have the ability to work as a team. And we're discussing these results periodically, typically around the milestones. And in the meantime, And behind the curtain, I am sharing information with the guides, seeking directions, asking them if I'm missing anything. And typically, as you pass some of these larger milestones, I tend to like to report to the decider, something very simple. I don't go to the decider with a big presentation. These guys don't have a lot of time for us. But I'll send them a short email, 200 words, 150 words. I'll make a quick phone call to last no more than 10 or 15 minutes and tell them about the good results. And I tell them about the challenges. We're having difficulty with this. And sometimes they give you guidance and they say, well, that's not as important as ABC, which you do quite well. It's always important not to hide the challenges, because these guys didn't get to the top level of the organization, just like many of you have gotten to the top of your organizations. You didn't do it by assuming that what the sales guy was telling you was correct. So they will check with the evaluators. So let's keep the credibility really high. When you're done in this phase, you can share the completed checklist with the evaluators once again, just to make sure they're happy with that. And then I let the guides know and send that short email to the decider that says, today we finished, and it looks like we completed 87 out of the 95 items. And here's what we're going to do about the other ones, or you can use that as an opportunity to set an appointment to discuss the other 5, which tends to be more interesting sometimes to people. And that gives you the ability to check off the 3rd box and move on to the 4th. The 4th box brings it all together. Here you're proposing a solution and you're figuring out how to close. Here in the preparation, where you're going to be checking the evaluator's agreement that the functional criteria has been met. So typically, if you haven't done it to this point, it needs to be part of the preparation here, because you want that person saying, yes, he's right, we achieved all these objectives. At that point, I use the business objectives and the critical to success list to build a proposal. The proposal doesn't have to be very long. Again, it's very practical, but it says we can achieve your business objectives. It could be 1 page or 2 pages, and we can achieve your critical to success functional list by doing these things. This is what we can provide, typically 2 or 3 pages, and then you have a pricing proposal somewhere. And that could be as simple as, depending on what you sell, it could be as simple as 2 lines, or it could be a more complex piece. But the idea is that you're presenting not a quote, but simply saying, this is how I solve your business problem and your functional problem. And then I take that proposal and I actually check with the guides once again and show them pieces of the proposal. In executing this, never make the full functionality, delivery, price proposal without getting some advice. And I like to use trial balloons. So I will tell an influencer, listen, I'm thinking of proposing this. What do you think? Do you think that's going to work? And I'd be surprised the level of detail that you can get from folks who are trying to help you do this. Plus, they start leaking information to the decider. The guides can help quite a bit as well in this stage, and they feel they're in the know. You're telling them before you tell anybody else, but not the whole thing. I give them pieces, right? The most critical pieces. Every single proposal you would get from me will address every business, every functional objective, every single one of them. And it's probably 3 or 4 pages, no more than that. But you need to address those things rather than just get a quote or get a PowerPoint presentation that tells you all about my product. Who cares? How do you solve my problem? That's really what people care about. And that's practical. Now, we're in the age of email, and we can talk about all these great online and et cetera, okay? The fact is, the best way to present a proposal is in person. If you can't do it on video, do it by phone. And phone is better than email. And never, I mean, I hate to make this so emphatic, never do email only for a proposal or for a negotiation for that fact. Because human beings communicate with our entire bodies, with our words, with our facial expressions. And that's very important to give you an advantage. Let the competitor send things by email. Let's work harder and get in front of these people if we can, or at least on video. Then you can check off the fourth box. So with all of this done, I should say, if you have any questions pop up, there is a questions from the audience area on the right side of your screen. Put the questions in there. We're going to have enough time to address some of them, and a couple of them are coming in. So, but I don't think I told you about this. So go ahead and do that if you have questions or something that we can do to make it more practical for you personally. Let's talk about forecasting. If you have followed the elements, the four elements, the four influence centers of influence, you're very well equipped to forecast in a very, very practical and realistic way. The smile guides your action plan, first of all, and it also guides your forecasting. So as you're checking off these various boxes, you can come up with 4 practical forecasting stages. I know somebody's thinking, wait a minute, we have 15 stages because I change a stage when I make the first call, when I make the first visit, when I send the first email. Okay, to me, that's not really practical because it's different in each and every case. What's practical is to look through and say, have I functionally qualified this customer? Do I know that I can achieve their objectives functionally? This is something you typically do with the evaluators, and it's typically the first thing that begins to happen, okay? The first call, so it starts right away. It is only completed and can only be checked off when you have an agreement with a customer of what their functionality is. What is that critical to success list? There you know you can compete, or you start negotiating features at that point with the customer. But you cannot check off that first stage of the sale until you know that you can compete, until you know what's on the list. Then the next item for the forecasting is alignment of the objectives at the high level. Okay, here this could happen from the first call. In fact, I hope that if you're prospecting with customers and these are large solutions, that you're starting really at the high level and let the high level person push you to the evaluators. So it could start at the first call. Most typically it begins after you've had some kind of a functional discussion, okay? And it certainly starts to happen right away. But it is not checked off until the decider confirms that you have aligned the business goals. You remember, we say at the end of that discussion, this is what I understand your key goals are, and that they have a budget. Now you know you can compete. Remember what happens if you compete, spend weeks in evaluations or pilot programs or loan software or loan equipment, and at the end, they didn't have a budget. So once you verify that you've aligned the objectives with a decider and that you do have a budget, you can move to the next level. The next level of forecasting is a functional fit. And it should be happening, that qualification or that proving that you have functional fit should be happening after you have made the 2 qualifications. I use this in sales meetings. A salesperson tells me they're making a product presentations, they are doing an evaluation, and they have not checked off the function qualification and the business alignment, and I stop the evaluations immediately. And I suggest for the sales managers listening that you do the same, because that functional fit is very costly for your company, not only in time and money, but in time and money that you're not spending somewhere else. So you can check that off when the evaluators agree that the solution meets the critical functionality. There are always going to be exceptions, but that you meet as many of those as you possibly can. That is your best functional fit. Then you can check that off, and then it's time to go back to the decider and make a proposal, a business proposal. And this could begin to happen, by the way, anytime during the sales cycle. I've worked with companies that right away they want some pricing. So you have to discuss pricing, but you're not making a proposal until you know that you can fit functionally and you can achieve the business goals. At that time, you bring it in front of the decider, and you continue to work with the decider, with the evaluators at that level, until they agree that the proposal works and they commit to buy, or they tell us to go away. It's one of the two. Now, if you use the system, it'll be very rare that you'll be told to go away at this stage, because somewhere in removing the other blocks, you would have known, and typically you will know it even before the customer knows it. So it keeps you from being surprised. Now, a couple of little principles here, because salespeople, all of us, and I call myself among you, we have been successful because we're very optimistic. Okay? Stop it for forecasting. Continue your optimism for everything else, but not for forecasting. You forecast until you know you don't know. How many times have we had a sales meeting where the salesperson says, I am going to get this deal? How do you know? Well, I did the same thing with another customer. You don't know. How do you know there's a budget? Well, it's not a lot of money and there's a company that's doing very well. You don't know. So until you know, you don't know. And then as you find out some of these blocks and you're qualifying both business and functional needs, once you think you know, do what very good sailors do. They triangulate. What I mean by that in the case of the B2B sale is to ask someone else for confirmation. This is, again, where your influencers and your guides can come in. And you can then ask, hey, I heard today that you have a project in October that you can use my services towards the middle of October. What do you think? Do you think that's realistic? That's what I mean by triangulating. Right? The other thing that I've learned that has been very important since I work with so many clients, and not just doing the sales training, but also in going through sharpening their sales organizations, is most people are using some type of CRM system. So to me, making this practical is to incorporate it into whatever sales forecasting my clients are using. You should look for ways, look at the 4 stages, and even if you want to keep the other 15 stages, I highly recommend that you plug these stages in as block removers or red flag removers within your forecasting mechanism, so that you can follow the SMILE practically. So we incorporate it into sales forecasting, whatever you have. I use it to drive discussions in sales meetings. It's always fun. Sales guy tells you 15 minutes about a specific customer meeting, etc. And at the end, I can just ask, do you have a critical to success list? If the answer is no, then that block is not checked off. You still need that. So let's go verify. And it's very powerful because you bring the customer along with you. You can prepare, this method can help you prepare sales visits without a lot of documentation and questionnaires and forms to fill out. You could actually have a SMILE and say, we're right here. We're going to go functionally verify what the customer said, or we have proven the functional solution, and now we need to go ahead and present it. Okay, so that whoever is in the car with you that day or in the airplane is ready to go by your strategy. Okay, I make this CRM friendly. I've incorporated this in Soho. We've incorporated this in Microsoft Dynamics and in Salesforce.com. I've had clients who have used it with ACT, with Goldmine, and I don't know about Nimble. Somebody just told me about Nimble a couple of days ago, so I added it in here if anybody is using it. Please write me later and tell me if you were able to plug it into Nimble. So what can you do today? Because your time is valuable, and I thank you for giving me this time. You can review your opportunities today. You can let the smile guide your plan. You'll have this presentation online. You'll be able to refer to it, or you can ask me later. Take a look at the smile. Where are you? Are you covering those blocks? Determine the elements that are not covered in action plan and start to cover them. It's never too late unless you've lost the deal already. Adjust the forecasting stages or probabilities if you use those, if you can, and be very realistic in your assessment. Remember, the smile drives the action plan until you know you don't know, and when you think you know, triangulate just to make sure you're not going to get surprised at the end. If you have questions, any other questions, there are three. I'm going to attempt to address them. We have about 5-6 minutes. You can write me. You can go to my website. You can call me. Actually, yes, I use the phone still, and I don't mind a call from a nice stranger. So please type your questions in the chat, and I thank you for those who have had the questions. The first one is, how do deciders react to your questions? It's a very, very good question. Well, they react if I go in with a high-level attitude. I'm trying to understand. Whenever I have prepared a bit, so I know a bit about their organization, they react just fine. I establish a dialogue. That's what I'm trying to do. Remember what they used to call this a sales interview. It's not a sales interview. It's a dialogue. We're trying to get to common ground and trying to figure out how to help each other. And by doing that, customers tend to react, even deciders tend to react. By the way, that works for the evaluators as well. Question about pigeonhole. I'm pigeonholed today. How do I get out? Okay, well, you're not the only one who's been pigeonholed. I've been pigeonholed, and most of the salespeople that I've worked with have been pigeonholed. First thing is to try to either contact the decider yourself, but in some cases you might be concerned that the person pigeonholing you may be upset. So I have also had managers, one of my manager perhaps, come in. At my level, I may bring the CEO to meet with someone, and have the manager contact the decider or ask for a meeting with the decider and bring me along. And then in that meeting, I can start to build the bridges. So typically, by the way, if you go to the decider really early in the sales cycle, you avoid this pigeonholing. So the earlier, the better, with good preparation. Then the last question that I have is, how long, it's a little bit of a spelling here, how long is the full sales training? And I would say the sales training is 2 days. It is done on site, and it includes workshops, so it takes a bit of time. We go about a day where we cover the elements of the sale. It's a half a day where we set up some workshops, and then a half a day for the forecasting, and then we use some real examples. Sometimes we stay a little further and integrate it into the forecasting system that people may have, the CRM systems. So, okay, you're welcome. For that one who said thank you. It's been my pleasure to speak with you today, and I wish I could see you and get more interaction, but I appreciate any comments that you may have. Please write me or send me some notes, and I look forward to hearing from you folks. The presentation will be available in the next couple of days. I understand it's quite quick, and And I thank you for your attention. Thank you for your participation. And good luck selling. Keep smiling. Something that I have seen increase sales in every single case that I have used it, and certainly has reduced overhead, which is one of the things that I hate most, is paperwork. And most people in the audience at this point can probably agree with me in that case. I'm going to say, please forgive me. It looks like there's a bit of a lag on the slides. So let's talk about practical selling. Let's get into the meat of it and what it is. Practical selling really has to do with simplifying what we do in order to be successful and to do it with the least overhead possible. There are really 4 centers of influence in every B2B sale, just 4. There are 4 elements to every sale, and there are 4 stages. What we'll do in the next 40 minutes or so is we're going to go through each one of these in a way that you will be able to utilize them, to use them today. Good morning in the West Coast, good afternoon in the East Coast, and good evening in Europe. If you're in Asia, you're working very late tonight. My name is Modesto Casas, and I'm here to speak to you a bit about practical selling. These are ways to get more sales, fewer surprises, with a lot less overhead, and that's typically what we look for in the sales world. Again, my name is Modesto Casas. I'm the founder and president of InRegion Inc., a consulting company that takes companies internationally. I'm also the creator of practical solution selling, and I've been using these techniques that I'm going to share with you for the last 3 decades, more or less. I've had executive worldwide management positions with several entrepreneurial companies, so I've always been involved with the entrepreneurial world in helping these companies to beat their larger competitors. I've also been able to use these very different audiences, and above all, to avoid forecasting surprises. That is extremely important because it's very costly to be surprised late in the process. So what I found that works and has worked for me for a very long time very well is to keep it very practical. But what does practical mean? It means that it's relating to what is real rather than what is possible or imagined. So there is no theories in anything we're going to discuss today. It is likely to succeed and reasonable to do or to use, and definitely that's part of the practicality of the system, and it's appropriate or suited for the actual use. So today we're focusing on B2B. There are permutations of this for the consumer sale. It's something that you can use with an existing system that you have today. Most people subscribe to some system, or you can make it your entire system and be even more practical. It is also after you hang up the phone. Okay. First, let's look at the B2B sale in general. Typically, you're working across time, weeks, months, whatever, and you're traversing levels of influence in an organization, from a synchronization of objectives to agreeing to engage, to proving a solution, floating some business model, setting trap for your competition, which I hope you do, and refining business models, and eventually you get to the other end where you can close. So you go from qualification to a close. And it really is not a straight line, as you will see in most theoretical systems, selling systems. It is not a straight line. It actually moves up and down in the organization. And when done right, it looks just like this. It starts high, goes towards the functional part of the business, and then moves back up to the highest influence to close the sale. This type of sales situation carries 4 different techniques to form relationships across various countries, Brazil, China, Europe, Eastern Europe, India, etc. So it does transcend the cultural nuances of each area. Let's. I'm specifically referring today to the business-to-business sale because it's quite complex. It involves multiple constituencies. Could take weeks, months. I've seen B2B sales, multi-million-dollar sales, take years to complete. It involves the progression of very costly events, and not just in time, but also in investment in money. And at the end, it leads to a close, or for most people who compete, to a loss, which is a very expensive loss. The B2B sale requires the salesperson to understand multiple needs within the customer. It requires that they drive the business at different levels of the organization with very, very